What's up, guys? This is JusticeSoulTuna, and I just recently watched the Great Games Terrible Legacy video by GameSpot, which talks about how Resident Evil 4 may have been a fantastic game, but started a terrible legacy for the survival horror genre. And survival horror is one that I'm a big fan of. I mean, I love Resident Evil, I love Dead Space, I love Fear. You know, I love those kind of games because I think they present a different kind of fun. And I love the action aspects of them, and as they've been, developing. I mean, I'm one of the few people that really loves like RE6. I loved RE5, and I love Fear 2, 3. I mean, 1 not so much, but Fear 2 and 3, and so on. And that's just me. That's my bias in the first place. Just so you probably have a negative prime for the rest of this video. However, I'm not gonna bring my bias into this. I want to just address this from a certain angle. Let's think of it this way. Are survival horror games really this sort of perfect genre that was tainted by action when RE4 basically made things work better? You have to wonder. First of all, there's one question that came to mind as I watched that video, and it's something I've agonized over, something I've gone over in my head over and over when arguments, against sort of RE6 or the Fear series or the Dead Space series come up, that I have to think about. And I'll put it to you this way. First of all, is it that survival horror games have died, or is it that survival horror games had a half-life in the first place? And by that I mean, have survival horror games been this timeless genre that could not, survive the test of time? Because, for example, platformers started off 2D. Platformers started off, in the 8-bit era, where, of course, it was, a character like, Mario jumping on 2D platforms and such like. But from the transition to 2D to 3D, of course, the aesthetic changes completely, the gameplay changes completely, and what you end up having is a completely different experience where it's no longer about, at least specifically, the timing of jumps on a 2D plane and having to, avoid enemies that come to you from a 2D angle, being only like jump over them, attack them or whatever, and to now 3D dealing with enemies in a different way. So of course enemies will have to react in a different way. Just compare a game like sort of your Sonic Advances on the Game Boy Advance to a game like Ratchet and Clank, which is a 3D platformer. The differences are huge. I mean, of course the gameplay is a big thing, but in the first instance, the difference in gameplay is a big one. They're almost two completely different games. Not obviously because, of course, they're completely different in terms of gameplay, because it's one of them Sonic, one is Ratchet. But in terms of the fact that in 3D, you'll have to deal with enemies in a different way. Or to give a better example, compare a 2D Sonic to a 3D Sonic. They have to play completely differently. Now, the point I'm trying to make at first with this is when a game, or a game genre, or a game series even, has to transition from one part of its lifespan to the next, there's some things that may have to be changed or evolve for it to still work. Now, what I mean by it has a half-life is, when these survival horror games first came out, they came out in a time with pretty bad controls, pretty bad graphics, pretty bad aesthetics, sort of done in a way that, yes, it was good for the time, good graphics at the time, PS1 games and all that with your Resident Evil 1, your Resident Evil 2. So it worked, or like maybe those N64 games were pretty spooky. I can't really think of any. I'd even go as far to say games like Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, and what's his name, GameCube. So, but back then the games themselves were done not badly, of course. They were done well, but you look at them now and it's like the gameplay, like the controls were just bad. The controls were bad, and if anything, you weren't just fighting against whatever it was within the world, you were fighting against the actual controls themselves. People may say that's part of the experience, but personally, I feel that this makes it feel as if the game itself was only scary, contingent upon the fact that the controls and the atmosphere were done in a way that was just so, awkward, so underdone compared to now, that, it's not that scary. And because down the line, you see when graphics get better, when, technology gets better, we can allow more data for our games, we can put in more things, graphics are better, controls are better. Can games still be, quote-unquote, scary? Now, of course, like you may point to examples of, games like Amnesia, games like Penumbra, games like Slender, right? But those games are actually the embodiment of my point. The fact is, those games are designed in a way that you cannot really, the game won't be action-packed, of course, because there's no real way of fighting back. There's no real way of, having good controls to use in the game to actually, play it as opposed to being, completely helpless. See, a game that has a good balance between, other than Dead Space 1 and 2, soon to be seen in 3 maybe, a game that had a good balance of decent controls, really decent controls, but a genuinely frightful, atmosphere and scare was like Alan Wake. I honestly feel like Alan Wake, in terms of its pacing, its design, was completely friggin' scary. I never felt limited, I never felt underpowered, but I never felt like, that it was like just a straight up action game. The fact that you had, like a pistol, a shotgun or whatever, and flashlights and all that, it really gave me this feeling of like serious tension, enemies appearing out of the darkness at any time. Things were really tense. But that's a great example, right? But many would say that that's not scary because you have a weapon or the controls are good. But the point is, when the controls have become good and you're in control and you're no longer helpless, of course things won't be as scary as if the controls are bad or if you have like 4 bullets in your gun or whatever. If you really want to create a scary experience, there's literally stylistic things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to limit the play. You're going to have to remove things. One of the perfect examples of a good, scary atmosphere was in Fear 3. Obviously, Fear 3 is a great action game, of course. It's got, shooting, cover system, all that kind of thing. One of the greatest aspects of that game is when you ran into, I think the Creeper was called. You were in an enclosed area, usually dark. Your screen goes completely red. You hear a breathing, like it's right behind your neck. Something's teleporting around the room, and several things set up the pace so nicely. You can't sprint, which means you can't run away. You barely see it, and every time it comes up to you, scratches you. When it scratches you, your health doesn't regenerate, because in Fear 3, compared to Fear 2 and 1, you don't have health packs. When it scratches you, you can't regenerate, so the more it scratches you, the chance you'll die. So it takes the game's already in-place mechanics and puts you in an even higher sense of tension. So I feel like these modern games do scares well. And people saying games aren't scary anymore, it's a subjective thing. Some people might get scared by it, some people won't. If you feel that the older games are scary for whatever reason, sure. But to say that the older games are definitively scarier for whatever reason, I don't think that's fair, because I also think that those could only be scary by design in context. Because after time, how scary can these games really be when we have to make the graphics and things better? And this leads me to my second question. This is another important one. So people may praise games like Amnesia, Penumbra, Slender, or whatever, right? You have to ask yourself, at what point will these games still be good? Because think of it this way. Progress means improving, adding new things, making it better, right? Someone in the GameSpot comments made a fantastic point. They said that RE4 had to progress. Resident Evil had to progress in general from RE4, because if you want to remake the same good idea, you're going to turn into Dynasty Warriors. You're going to turn into rehashing the same good idea. And don't get me wrong, I think Dynasty Warriors is fine, and the people enjoy the series. But that problem with Dynasty Warriors, many people see, and many reviewers see, it's the same type of game over and over. They've taken the same good idea and they said, okay, this is good. Let's just keep making it that way. The problem with that is you will not really gain that many new fans unless people just randomly see it, and you end up just being this samey series that that basically never gets off the ground, and that's a problem. See, RE5 improved on RE4 and added new things, of course, but it still played like RE4, and so did Revelations. RE6 plays like a completely different game, and I feel like RE6 is no longer living in RE4 shadow, which, if anything, you've got to give it that. So a game like Amnesia, right? And I think, if I'm correct, Penumbra was the prequel to Amnesia, but a game like Amnesia, you have to ask yourself, what choice will developers have to make with that? Do they want to make a game series that either, because obviously Amnesia's been very popular, it's made a lot of money. Do they want to make a game series that just takes the idea of Amnesia, helpless, you've got a lantern, you need to find items, and just repeat that for the next however many games? How entertaining will that be to play the same game over and over? Or do they want to improve it, add new things? They want to take the main character and put him in better situations. He's smarter, he's more equipped to deal with things. See, Resident Evil is a continuing series. It's not an individual games where different characters and different things happen. That's not the case. Leon S. Kennedy, Chris Redfield, and now Jake Mueller. These are people who have already been through the zombie crisis. They know what to deal with. They're strapped up. They're ready to deal with it. So yes, it's an action game. I would always say that games like Fear, games like Resident Evil, and games like I was about to say Fear again, And games like, I can't even think of another example. I mean, games like Condemned 1 and 2, or, you know, your Dead Space. These are games that are, yes, they're still horror games. Maybe not scary games. Maybe they're not scary all the time, but they are supernatural shooters. They are horror action experiences. They are sequels that have been made to build upon the previous game's iterations, and a sequel can only make things better. It can only add new things. It can't take things out. It can't limit the player. And even then, they've done well to make sure that it's not a complete balls-out action experience. You still need health. You know, you still need to be careful. You still need to be smart with your decisions. In RE6, they introduced the stamina system for melee attacks. So even though melee attacks are so much better, you need a stamina system, like, to basically moderate that, so it's not like you can just kick every enemy to death. So it's stuff like this you have to ask yourself. Are survival horror games timeless, or do they have a half-life? Are they games that were going to be, you know, perfect no matter what, or did they pretty much have to, you know, lose something out along the way to become better? Because if graphics and controls improve, if empowering the player by making, you know, the main character stronger, will that not then obviously reduce the quote-unquote scary feeling? Because by design, a horror game can only be scary if the person feels weak, vulnerable, and unsure, and the controls have to have a certain amount of limitation. And the second thing is, when making a sequel to a horror game, will the character have to be underpowered consistently? Will the game have to be the same type of game to make that consistent scary? And is that good for the game? Is that good for the game series? Is that good for the players? You know, some developers have to choose between keeping a game exactly the same, taking what makes the game exactly the same and scary, or making a new game and trying to find new ways to thrill the player and trying to find new ways to make them survive a horror. So I'm not a purist who believes that a genre has to stay still and be stale and never do anything different and never change anything. Because we're not, well, you know, if that was the idea, then why would Call of Duty ever been so big if it had not introduced the, you know, RPG style leveling to a multiplayer system? A really big change, you know, that is echoed in so many other FPSs, you know, to this date. Even Halo, it's a big change that, you know, yes, it could taint the pure experience. You know, action has tainted the pure survival experience. But at the core of a lot of horror experiences, and you see this in horror movies, is an element of action where the characters have to basically take action and, you know, fight against the zombies. You know, they can't be on the run and scary forever, because that would mean using a certain type of character trait, and that becomes the genre, stale, unmoving, unchanging. But the FPS genre had to make certain changes, certain ideas, to give new options to the players, add RPGs, you know, an RPG style leveling, add, you know, a theater system, add, you know, more social features to make an FPS no longer just, you know, linear corridor shooter, do this, do that, you know, game over, the end. You know, or even just a multiplayer run around and shoot people with a certain amount of guns that you just pick up randomly. But now you have, you know, customizable classes, you've got leveling up, you've got customization, and so on. So with the survival horror series, they had to find some way to increase the sense of scale, the sense of progress, so that a person feels empowered, a person feels like, I can fight back against this horror. So it may not be for everyone, and you have to think to yourself, yes, I mean, survival horror has changed, but perhaps this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not the target demographic. Maybe me and my sort of like pure survival horror experiences will not benefit from games like Resident Evil, will not benefit from games like Dead Space. And that's fine. You can play your Penumbras and your Amnesias, you know, nobody's stopping you. If that's what you enjoy, that's fine. But you have to understand that game series will progress and change regardless of how we feel about it and how, you know, we enjoyed it in the past. I mean, that's just my opinion. You can share what you think. You can you know, add your little 2 cents or whatever. But I mean, this has been JusticeSoulTuna. I'm just here to talk about how I feel about the survival horror genre and how I feel about genres progressing. That's pretty much it. Like, share, comment, all that good stuff. You know what it is. I'll talk to everyone later.